Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. John Keir here with you on another solo episode, Season 6, Episode 6, Part Number 2, talking about safeties in this year's upcoming NFL draft. Are there any players that the Steelers might take at the safety position? I'll talk a little bit about that. We'll be talking about why the Steelers might consider taking a safety, and then I'll talk about 5 different players that the Steelers or anybody might be having their eyes on, and we'll go from there. I'll talk about their strengths and weaknesses, my overall thoughts on them, and their ceiling and floor, as well as their projection and how they could fit in with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So with that, let's get right into things. Alright, so I have 5 different safeties here to look at today, starting with our Darius Washington. He is from TCU. He's a smaller type of safety. We've got Talanoa Hufanga, I believe is how you say it, from Southern California. We got Demar Hamlin from Pitt, the local product. Joshua Bledsoe from Missouri. I take it back, there's only 4. I was originally going to do 5, but I didn't end up doing that when all was said and done. Apologize. I was going to look at, I'm blanking on the guy's name from Arizona State, but there are only 4. So, before we get into them, let's talk a little bit about what the Steelers have at the safety position. So, safety, you've got your starters in place this upcoming season. Both safeties are entering the final year of their respective contracts, that being Minkah Fitzpatrick and Terrell Edmunds, both former first-round picks in the year 2018. Fitzpatrick, actually, I take that back. Not the final year. They have 2 years left. This is the year for the 5th-year option, though. No-brainer for Fitzpatrick. He's going to be getting an extension more likely than not after this season. Terrell Edmunds is a different story. I don't know if he's going to be getting a long-term deal or if he's one of those guys that's going to be shake your hands and we'll see you around the town down the road here. We'll see what happens this year. He's slowly, gradually improved, but he hasn't really broken out the way that you would hope a former first-round pick would. So we'll see how that goes. So on the surface, you might look at that and say, well, there really isn't much of a need to draft a safety, and you might be right. But there really isn't a third safety on the roster right now. You know, Jordan Dangerfield is a free agent. He's more of a special teams player, but he still provides depth. The other safeties on the roster are John Battle, Antoine Brooks Jr., and Marcus Allen. And those last 2 guys are kind of linebacker hybrids, so they're not truly safeties. If they are, they're backup strong safeties, box safeties at best. I mean, you look at the rest of the safety room, there's really only one true free safety on the team, and you've got 2 other guys that are mostly hybrids that are closer to linebackers, it seems, and another guy that's just a practice squad player. So, I mean, what do you really have besides your starters? Not much. You also have Miles Killebrew, who could be considered one of those hybrid guys as well. I really think this is a position where you could add depth. 3 safeties play a lot in today's NFL. I know Cameron Sutton kind of covers as a safety in a manner of speaking. But given the way secondaries are deployed with, covering more receivers, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect more play from safeties and needing a third safety going forward here. So with that in mind, let's get into our Darius Washington from TCU, a former 3-star recruit and the number 5 safety in Louisiana. Didn't play much his freshman year, only 4 games before getting injured, and was able to get a medical redshirt. Then became the Big 12 Defensive Freshman of the Year the following season and was a freshman All-American with 46 tackles, and 5 interceptions in 12 games. Became an all-conference honorable mention his sophomore season with 10 starts and 37 tackles. And that's it, because that was this past year, so he declared for the draft kind of early. He's only 5'8" and 178 pounds, and I know what you're thinking. Mike Hilton. You're thinking, Mike Hilton. Could he be the next Mike Hilton? Well, possibly. I think Mike Hilton's a bit of a unicorn in that regard. Him and Tyrann Mathieu are a rare breed, but maybe our Darius Washington is the next in that line of players. So, in terms of his best attributes, in my opinion, I thought that his football IQ, his instincts were very good. He shows a very good understandings of the workings of the defense he played in. And I thought in zone coverage especially, he did a great job of reading either the quarterback's eyes or the receiver in front of him. He was able to break on the ball quickly because he could see what was happening before it actually happened. That's a very good trait to have, especially in a safety. And he was also pretty good in run support. Now, keep in mind, he's 5'8". He's not going to be a linebacker in terms of his ability in run defense. Neither was Mike Hilton. Mike Hilton was a really good run defender, though, you would say. Yeah, he would miss some tackles, and he wouldn't be able to be as impactful as with the way he plays comparatively if he was, 6'3". But I think that our Darius Washington does a really good job flying around and making plays in the running game, given his size. He can get into gaps in a hurry, and, he gives it his best when taking on linemen, which is no easy task considering his size. And similarly to a guy like Mike Hilton or Tyrann Mathieu, I hate to keep hammering the size thing, but you can't make it this far if you aren't a tough football player, and our Darius Washington clearly is. After missing most of his redshirt freshman season due to an injury, he played every single game, 22 consecutive games following that. That's a tough man right there, and pretty durable given his size. I know they get bigger and badder at the NFL level, but this guy's no joke. Our Darius Washington, he's a smart football player and physical. He's a physical player at his size. So there's a lot to like there. Unfortunately, in terms of the negatives, his general athleticism, just not there. If you look at relative athletic score, which takes into account size, explosiveness, general agility, and speed, he was just average there, a 5.12 out of 10. So his size is his biggest issue, obviously, but he is quite explosive. As I mentioned before, he can break on plays really easily and quickly. I think he's agile enough to make up for the fact that he isn't huge either. His long speed isn't elite enough to be a deep safety, and that's probably okay given his size, but that also means he's going to be somewhat limited in terms of what he can do. He doesn't have the build of an outside cornerback. You can have outside guys playing in the slot if they have the right size, but not vice versa. So he can't be a deep safety. He could be a slot corner, and he could potentially be a box safety. So he is somewhat limited in terms of his flexibility and general athleticism. But also for his size, you have to keep in mind that his man coverage skills are probably not going to be as great. First of all, he's more comfortable in zone coverage, but again, he's often a matchup problem with his assignment. Unless if he's going up against a running back, he's usually going up against a guy that's bigger than him. Certainly tight ends. Tight ends give him lots of problems, as you might imagine. So teams that draft him are going to have to keep in mind of who he's matched up on, because unless if it's a certain type of player, he's going to be a liability in man coverage. On the talent to production scale, his talent is not overwhelming comparative to other safety prospects. He makes up for that with fantastic production and a fantastic work ethic. His ceiling, I know the comp to Mike Hilton, Tyrann Mathieu. I understand it. I like it, though. I know it's the easy one to make, but he really looks like one of those guys. He's a playmaker, man. He works hard, plays hard, physical for his size. He won't back down from anyone, just like Mike Hilton. I love it. I really liked what I saw. The ceiling on him is a guy like Mike Hilton, a good slot cornerback / box safety who can help in the running game and can be impactful. I don't think he's the blitzer that Mike Hilton definitely isn't, but he can be helpful in the running game. He can be a nice kind of Swiss Army knife, good in zone coverage, and can help a secondary in a limited capacity. He'd be a good role player for sure, number 3 corner or safety in a limited role. His floor is that he just never is able to overcome his size, never becomes more than a solid special teams player, but I think he's going to be closer to his ceiling than his floor. I mean, he checks a lot of the boxes. If he was a little bit taller, he's probably a top 1 or 2 safety in this draft class. It's as simple as that. So his projection is kind of money. I've seen him projected between the 2nd and 4th rounds. It really depends on what NFL teams value in terms of his size. Do they say, oh, you know, he's a smaller player, I don't know if I trust that, then maybe he'll fall. But you see a team that maybe like the Ravens, who draft a lot of good defensive backs, they look and say, well, a guy like Mike Hilton's been causing us problems for years, and he just went to the Bengals. Maybe we ought to get a guy like that for ourselves. Maybe he goes a little earlier. Personally, I think he's going to go in the 3rd round. I think he's good enough to last in this league for a long time. And even though he has limited potential in terms of what he can do, I think that a team is going to see what he has done on the field so far and think we have to have something like that. So, bottom line, I think that you're talking about our Darius Washington as roughly a 3rd round pick, maybe a little earlier, possibly a little later, and he should be able to fit into a defense if he is used properly, like Mike Hilton, in the way he is used in the Steelers defense, or was used in the Steelers defense, and how Tyrann Mathieu is used. But that might be a bit of an extreme example. He's got talent. It's just a matter of whether an NFL team will use him properly. So that was our Darius Washington. Let's move on to Talanoa Hufanga from University of Southern California, a junior standing at 6'1" and 215 pounds. Hufanga was named the 2017 Polynesian High School National Player of the Year and was first team All-Oregon, had 44 tackles, 7 interceptions, and scored 11 touchdowns, 7 of them on offense in high school his senior season. So that's impressive. Two-way athlete. As a freshman, started 5 games right away. Didn't finish the season, though, because he broke his right collarbone against Arizona State. Then his sophomore season, started 10 games, was second team All Pac-12, finished with 90 tackles, and had 7.5 for a loss plus 3.5 sacks. He also suffered a concussion against Utah and sprained his shoulder against Arizona. And then last year was an All-American and a first-team All-Pac-12 and Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. In just 6 starts, racked up 62 tackles and had 4 interceptions along with 2 forced fumbles. So this guy was making plays left and right throughout his college career, that's for sure. 200-plus tackles in his collegiate career, 16.5 tackles for loss, and the 4 aforementioned interceptions. So overall, looking at this guy, you know, it's impossible not to think safety. You've got a Polynesian player at USC. You're thinking about Troy Polamalu, you know? It's just unavoidable. They do have some similarities in terms of their play, but the size is a huge difference. Hufanga plays like a linebacker, and he lined up at linebacker a lot too. So I knew getting into this that this was going to be a bit of a different player, especially when you consider the way the game has changed. But, you know, right away, the things I loved that from what I saw from Hufanga, his ability as a run defender was very good. He really is like a true box safety linebacker hybrid with the way that he plays. He plays the run like you would want a safety to play the run. He is down there. He can make plays to help prevent long gains if he's asked to, although it's not his strength. But he can fill holes just like a linebacker. He does a good job of recognizing plays in the running game, when he's closer to the line of scrimmage, that is. He does have his warts when it comes to pursuit angles on the sideline and recognition of read option. But in terms of the physical profile and the way that he combats the ground game from the defensive side, I like what I saw. He flows to the football well, as long as it's not a race to the boundary. He's a physical player, takes on blocks well, sheds blocks well, and gets to the ball carrier in relative short order. So I think he's a pretty good run defender. Really like a true linebacker safety hybrid that you see nowadays. He's helpful in that area. He's also flexible. I don't know that his versatility translates to the NFL level, and I'll get into that in a minute. He played all over the place. Deep safety, box safety, inside linebacker, outside linebacker, edge rusher, slot cornerback. He did pretty much everything the defense asked him to do, and I'll get into why I don't think he'll do all of that. But even if he can't do everything that I just mentioned, he can still be a box safety, possibly a slot cornerback in certain situations. He can play in your front seven. Maybe not long term, but he can in a pinch. I think that's pretty valuable to NFL teams, to have a jackknife, utility knife. What am I thinking of? Swiss Army knife. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot that. Anyhow, he could be kind of like a Swiss Army knife where he can help the defense in a lot of different manners. So that's something that's attractive to teams, and something that's kind of surprising because he's not the best athlete. He still has really good ball skills. He's really good in this area. He didn't have eye-popping numbers, but he can make plays. I saw 2 of his 4 career interceptions on tape. The first one was a fantastic display of athleticism, tipping the ball to himself in midair, similar to what we saw from Terrell Edmunds in Jacksonville this year. And the second play was one where he just exploded and broke on an out route, jumped it and took it to the house. He's got strong arms and can rip the ball away from receivers as well. He's kind of like a cornerback, a strong cornerback like that. That was impressive to see. I was not expecting to see that. On the flip side, though, I mentioned possibly some limitations to his versatility. That's because for a safety, he's really not a great athlete. He really is like a more athletic version of a linebacker. His hips, he can't flip them quickly. Long speed isn't there. He played a lot of deep safety snaps in college. I was just kind of surprised to see that. That's definitely not going to happen in the NFL level. He's a lot closer to a pure linebacker. Think of what Mark Barron is today than he is, Minka Fitzpatrick. So on top of his hips and his long speed being an issue, he's practically unusable as a deep safety, like I said. He might be able to play slot cornerback in a pinch, but in the context of safeties and athletic safeties, he's not a super athletic safety. And like I said, the versatility, not going to be able to play deep safety. Maybe can play a bit in the slot if it's zone coverage, but he's not going to be able to survive there long term. He's going to be a box safety more likely than not, but he can still help in the front seven as well. Not great in man coverage, again, because of his stiff hips. He's not comfortable with his back turned to the ball, too. So being matched up against faster guys, he's going to be in trouble. Again, I kind of compared him to Mark Barron, John Bostic in that regard. I can see the correlation there. And then another issue is just his injury history, the durability. He's very tough. He's definitely competitive. That type of mentality served him well, and he's fearless, but it also got him hurt before. He's got a concussion in the past. He's broken his collarbone twice. That could potentially limit his longevity in the NFL, so that's something to keep aware of. His ceiling, I think he could be a nice version of a modern-day linebacker or box safety, kind of like a rover type player. Not a guy that's going to play the majority of snaps, but could be a sub-package type of player, or you want a big nickel. He could fill that role. I really think so. He's got a lot of things that he can do, and I think that he could be a solid player that's a part of a defense, not the centerpiece of the defense for a good number of years. From the talent production scale, more production than talent for sure, but he doesn't have super high upside, but he has enough of an upside to match his production. And his floor, you could be talking about a guy like Antoine Brooks Jr. or Marcus Allen, a guy that he's technically a safety, but could play linebacker, but doesn't play either really well enough to get significant snaps and is just a special teams fit. And given the type of player he is, I think the Steelers already have too many players like this. So I wouldn't want to see the Steelers going after a guy like this just because they already have him on the roster. And you add in his injury problems, that's concerning. 10 years ago, I think he could have really seen him as a strong safety, but right now, the way that he is, he's probably going to be limited. And again, his injury history is concerning. Even if his defensive upside isn't all that exciting, I think he's going to be a good special teams player. I've seen him being considered a midday 3 pick, a 6th round selection. I wonder where he'd be projected if he didn't have all those injuries in the past. Probably another round or two higher. Like I said, the ceiling is low, but the floor is a little higher, I think. If you're adding a guy like this in the 6th round who can help out on special teams, that's great. But you don't want to be taking these guys late if they have injury concerns, unless if they have high upside, and he doesn't. So I'd be wary of Hufanga just from that standpoint, especially for the Steelers, because they already have guys like that. All right, next on the list here, I have the local Pitt product, Demar Hamlin, former attendee of Central Catholic High School, a school that had the likes of Dan Marino and Mark Bulger attend there years ago, was the top-rated defensive player in Pennsylvania, according to 24/7 Sports, the Class AAA Defensive Player of the Year in 2015, and was named the number 5 prospect in Pennsylvania, according to ESPN. Played sparingly as a freshman, only 3 games, and was able to use a medical redshirt. The following season, in 4 starts, had 41 tackles and an interception before breaking out as an honorable mention for the ACC as a redshirt sophomore with 14 starts and had 90 tackles to go with 2 interceptions and 4 pass breakups. Redshirt junior, 12 more games and starts, 84 tackles this time with 10 pass breakups and another pick. And then last season was second team All-ACC with 10 starts, 67 tackles, and 2 interceptions, and it was invited to the Senior Bowl. Hamlin was another one of those guys who, not super high on the talent scale, but had a lot of production in college. A team leader, a guy that many in the locker room looked to, not just as a positive influence, a good leader, but a guy that could get it done on the field as well. Again, not the best athlete, and why don't I start with the negatives for him there. Long speed, freaky athleticism. He never jumped out on tape, and he didn't in testing either. But at the same time, I felt like he was quick enough in short areas and agile enough to turn around when he needed to. He was tested deep often in the tape I saw, and he never gave up a deep pass in his direction. Again, it's just a short sample size, but I thought he did a good job. So he's not great in long speed, but when he was able to use his short area quickness, I didn't feel like I was watching a guy that wasn't a good athlete in that sense. What else? His man coverage skills, adequate enough in a pinch. He'll have a hard time keeping up with the really good athletes and receivers at the NFL level. I'll be interested to see where teams put him, because he did a good job of playing man coverage in terms of converging on a screen pass or a play where he could read something quickly. He's definitely better in zone coverage, but the short area quickness thing I was talking about, again, that lends itself better to zone coverage, but in man coverage, if he got the right matchup, he kind of held his own pretty well. I'd just be worried about the fact that in the NFL you're going to be facing a lot better players, harder matchups, and I don't think that he's going to be great there. He was just good enough in college, which means in the NFL he probably won't be that. His best attributes, though, definitely his ability in run support, his bread and butter. He was an awesome run stopper, a big part of Pitt's good run defense over the past few years. And it was nice to see on tape. The first game I saw, I didn't like what I saw from him, but as time went on, the later the tape got, the better he got too. So he was able to improve his run defense, got better as far as his tackling went, and he was an important part of that run defense. Also, having played this long, he's a very smart player. I really liked what I saw from him. Makes his reads very well, puts himself in a good position to make plays. Wasn't caught out of position very often. He did bite on play fakes from time to time. He got caught cheating, peeking into the backfield a bit. But, running out, breaking routes, running stuff in front of him was kind of dangerous because he could break on the ball quickly and because he was reading things pretty well. It's when he gets his back turned that he tends to struggle a little bit more. Anything else I'm missing here? Something I wanted to mention. Hamlin's long speed, probably going to keep him from being a true deep safety. He might get cracks at it from time to time, but I think he'd be a good split safety linebacker hybrid that could work in the slot occasionally. I think he could be a pretty good special teams player too. So if you want to talk about a floor, the floor is he's Jordan Dangerfield. In fact, honestly, I think that's probably what he is Jordan Dangerfield, with a little more potential to work in the regular defense in a limited capacity. His ceiling is he's a poor man's Terrell Edmonds probably, but I don't think he's as good of an athlete as Edmonds. So I like to think that Demar Hamlin, good run stopper, smart player, good in zone coverage, not in man. Limited role, should be able to play as a part of a defense in specific packages. I didn't see him blitz a ton. I'd be curious to see if he can be used as an attacker, like a blitzing safety. I don't know how good he performed there, but you're talking about a guy that's being projected, I think day 3 from what I see. Let's see what PFF says. Demar Hamlin. They have him ranked in the 4th round. The injury history is a bit concerning. And like I said, he's quick, not super fast. I don't think the floor is... I think the floor is pretty high, and that's nice. 4th round sounds about good to me. I'm thinking about... the Steelers just don't need a player like that right now, unless if you're talking about replacing Jordan Dangerfield, which I would be all for. The 4th round might be a bit rich for me in terms of that, but again, I think he's got the potential to be better than that, if not a ton better, than slightly better. He has a ton of playing time too, so it should be a quick transition for him to the NFL level. He should be a special team star right away, and maybe you use him as your 3rd safety. The one concern is I don't think he can play deep safety. So 4th, if it's a late 4th round, I could live with taking Demar Hamlin, but you still got to find someone that could back up Minka Fitzpatrick. So I wouldn't hate it, but I'd still have my questions and concerns about Demar Hamlin. Last but not least, I have the senior safety Joshua Bledsoe from Missouri at 6 foot and 200 pounds. He was a former 2-star prospect out of high school. He scored a bunch of touchdowns in different areas as a senior. 9 rushing, 1 receiving, a punt return, and a fumble return. Played mostly special teams his first 2 seasons before starting 12 games as a junior, racking up 49 tackles and breaking up 10 passes. And then as a senior, started 10 more games and intercepted his only career pass, having his only career interception, I should say. Bledsoe was a guy that That's something that you see a lot nowadays with these defensive backs. Similar to Demar Hamlin, he's versatile, smart, and experienced with a lot of time playing in different positions. I will say the guy that Bledsoe reminded me a lot of was Amani Hooker. We looked at a couple years ago. He was listed as a safety, but he really played most of his time in the slot. From what I saw from Bledsoe, spent most of his time in the slot. Did play a little bit of linebacker, box safety. Wasn't really playing deep all that much. So he was mostly just a slot guy. But there were some things that I saw that I liked. And number one was his competitive toughness. He was a tough football player, and he's not huge, and he's not the biggest player on the defense, but going up guys like Kadarius Toney and Terrace Marshall Jr. and holding zone against those guys was impressive. And the way he sticks his face in the fan in the running game was pretty impressive. He plays, for instance, I'm blanking on the guy's name, the linebacker I looked at from West Virginia. I can't remember his name. I'm going to have to look him up. The way he handled the running game, I thought was comparable to that linebacker from West Virginia. And I know it's a little different because we're talking mostly from the outside here. He's not an outstanding tackler, but he's willing to help. And if he can get coached up a little bit, I'd like my chances to have him there. On the outside, in the slot, I mean. He's at his best in man coverage. He has a lot of experience covering players in the slot that are bigger than him, and you could see it on tape. He's in good position a lot of times. He gets his hands up, knocks passes away. He has more struggles when handling man coverage, though, in the middle of the field. A man-heavy scheme is where he'll be most at home, though, I think, in the NFL. I'm trying to think. What else? Yeah, he's got all the traits of a hybrid defensive back linebacker. He's not a great athlete, but again, good. Just like the other guys I've talked about today. He's probably a similar version of Cameron Sutton, just built a little differently. Played in the slot, had significant snaps at safety, lined up at linebacker spots, so a bulkier version of that, I suppose. He did play a bit of deep safety. I don't think that he can do that in the NFL, but it will help teams that are looking for just a kind of, again, a Swiss Army knife type of piece. Weaknesses, his ball skills, they got better in college, especially when he was hanging with other receivers and man coverage. His ball skills did get better, but again, only one interception in 4 seasons was not all that good. And I didn't think his zone coverage skills were that good. Missouri didn't run a ton of zone, and the few times they did, I felt like he was uncomfortable. So a team that's taking him is going to have to be aware that he might not be a great zone coverage cornerback. He might be, but they just ran it zone just not very often. So it's going to be hard to tell if he's going to be able to translate that to the NFL level. And he was just kind of... not a ton stood out to me when I was watching Bledsoe. I had a hard time seeing him pop on tape. The problem with me is I picked too many of the same type of players. Besides our Darius Washington, he was a guy that stood out a bit to me. Ceiling for Bledsoe. Where does he stand out to me? I'm going to have to think about that one. He never graded all that great throughout his career, but he was able to force a lot of incompletions. See, that's the thing, is that he similarly to Keith Taylor, he could break up passes, but he just didn't come away with the interceptions that you would want a guy like him to be able to do. But, he lined up all over the place. So you're talking about a guy that can do a lot, but can he do a lot well? That's the thing these teams have to wrestle with. He can get better as a tackler, though. I'm not convinced he can be a great special teams player, but he might be able to be a good special teams player. So, I don't know. He was interesting. I just couldn't get a good feeling on him. I've seen him projected as a 3rd round pick in several places. I just don't know that I'd take him that high. But again, guys, the super version of him would probably be Jeremy Chen last year. Was he the defensive rookie of the year? I can't remember. No, I think it was Chase Young. I'm going to have to look this up now. I have to look this up. But Jeremy Chen was a guy that could kind of do it all. But he wasn't great, but he did a lot of things well enough. And I think that would be his ceiling, is he can do a bunch of different things Bledsoe could well enough. So it was Chase Young. Okay. Why did I think it was Jeremy Chen? But anyways, I guess a poor man's Jeremy Chen is kind of what I would expect Bledsoe to be. So 4th round, possibly. But this guy's more of a slot cornerback than he is a deep safety. So maybe it's unfair to refer to him as a safety, but that's the way the college game is at certain schools, is you've got guys that double as safeties and slot cornerbacks, and that's what he did. So again, versatility is a thing that especially the Steelers, like some teams do, especially the Steelers, they really value that versatility, and Bledsoe does bring that to the team. So time will tell. But of the 4 guys that I looked at here today, my favorite was Demar Hamlin. I really do see him as somewhere in the middle between Terrell Edmunds and Jordan Dangerfield. I think he'd be a great add to the special teams unit and could develop into a nice backup box safety that could see rotational playing time in some packages. And for a day 3 pick, that's not bad at all. And the guy I disliked the most was Joshua Bledsoe. I just had a tough time getting a read on him. I wanted to compare him to Cameron Sutton before, but he's just not quite that player. He is a slot cornerback, but he can't play outside like I think Sutton can. He is helpful to a defense. He can probably play special teams. I'm not sure that he can, but I think he can. But for a 3rd round pick, I was just hoping for a guy that could stick out a little more on tape, and he just didn't do that for me. So time will tell. But that's going to finish today's wrap up this discussion on cornerbacks and the 4 guys I was talking about, as well as, I said cornerbacks. Oh, I am a mess. Safeties. I'm thinking slot corner with Joshua Bledsoe. Oh, what a mess. Well, that seems like as good a place as any to end this discussion. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. I'll be back talking about running backs. That should be pretty interesting. The Steelers need a running back, and everyone wants a first-round running back. Well, don't get me started on that. I'll get into that later. But in any case, thank you for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. If you have any questions about the show, if you liked what you heard, or if you didn't like what you heard, especially the last few minutes, feel free to offer up some advice and feedback about why the host struggles so much at the end of this podcast to get the words out and speak correctly, like I still am right now. Feel free to email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. And check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram under the name Stronger Than Steel Podcast. Until next time, thank you as always for listening, and have a terrific day.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel Podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.